We are recording the interview of Terry Salomonson. This interview is being conducted by Jennifer Seavey from Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. It is 11 a.m. on September 7th, 2017. Okay, Terry, so where and when were you born?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan at Arts Center Hospital, October 6, 1946.
Okay. Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
Virginia, the maiden name was Steinhoff, and my dad was Norman Salomonson. He was a photo engraver in the advertising world.
Do you have any siblings?
I have two. I'm the oldest of three. The second born was Claudia. She passed away about 8 years ago, and the youngest one is Cindy.
Did they serve in the military as well?
No, they did not.
What were you doing before you entered the service?
I was in the printing industry. I had, at the time when I was in high school, which was Bentley High School in Livonia, Michigan, where I lived, they had a co-op program where you went to school during your last year of high school in the morning, and you got a regular full-time or part-time job, as it might be. And I worked initially for the city of Livonia in their printing department, and then I went on to a professional career, if you will, by being a printer at a regular printing shop.
Okay. What made you decide to join the military then? Was it shortly thereafter?
Yeah, it was very shortly thereafter. I actually got a letter of greetings, and we'd like to have you come down for a pre-induction physical. One of my jobs when I worked at the city was to go around to various city offices during the day to drop off the printing requests that had been filled. We printed business cards for the city, like the mayor or the department heads or whatever, in various forms and things that the various city offices needed. In one of the buildings that I entered, right as you came in the front door where they had a couple city offices, was a Navy recruiter. And for many, many months he kept teasing me, one of these days we're gonna, I won't put it the way he put it, we're gonna get your butt, you know. And it became somewhat of a running joke. And then when I got this pre-induction notice, I went down to him and I said, with the letter in hand, I said, I guess my butt's yours now. And he said, unfortunately, I can't help you. At the time, the draft was going pretty heavy, and they were trying to get as many people as possible were trying to, I guess, avoid going in the Army or whatever for basic, as a basic draftee. And a lot of them, like myself, wanted to go into something where you'd get a little bit better training on something. My field was, I wanted to get into ATC, air traffic control, or I wanted to get into some sort of aircraft electronics. So I figured I could get that with the Navy. Well, like I said, the draft was very heavy at the time, so people were running off to the Navy or to the Air Force or even the Marines, and they could sign them up and they could defer them going into enlistment up to 120 days. This particular Navy recruiter already had a full load of everybody he was responsible for recruiting in the next 120 days, and I think he said he had like 200 people on a standby list that were desperate to get in the Navy, not to be drafted into the Army. But he did tell me, he says, look, I'll tell you this, he says, I'll swear in court I never told you this information. I'm going to divulge it here. He said, I know an Air Force recruiter, and he told me where. And he said, if you go down and take a test, a pre-induction test, and if you outscore anybody that's already on the 120-day deferment list, I could be replacing somebody. And it made them look better. I guess you were recruiting more people with higher scores. So I said, okay, I figured that was an option. And I went down, I took the test. A couple days later they called me and they said, when would you like to go? And I said, well, what are my options? They said, you can go tomorrow, or we can hold you for 120 days and then go. He said, you basically aced the test. So I said, well, give me 2 weeks so I can give my employer a 2-week notice. And on October 28th, 1966, I went down to Fort Wayne, which was a induction point in Detroit, not Fort Wayne, Indiana. And they told me that that happened to be coincidentally the same date I was supposed to be going for my Army pre-induction physical. And they said, you're going to hear your name being called a lot. Do not respond to it, because you'll end up in a long line of medical, testing and everything else. You will miss the bus to the airport, and you'll miss the flight to go down to San Antonio, which is where I was going for basic training in the Air Force. So they said, do not answer. We will tell the Army later we have you. So that was my beginning.
Okay, so after you got down to San Antonio, what was that like? What was basic training like for you?
It was pretty typical of the time. I can't qualify, like when my dad's older brother was in the Army Air Force in World War II. He flew B-17s. He was a pilot in Europe over Germany and stuff. I can't qualify it by what the guys go through today, but it was pretty much, you get a quick haircut. You start finding out that there is a right way, a wrong way, and the Air Force way of doing things, and that's for a specific reason. And you start coordinating where you're not an individual, you start becoming a team member. And you go through all the calisthenics, all the training and everything, and it was for 6 weeks. And then I was given an assignment. Initially, like I said, I wanted ATC, air traffic control, but I got into airborne nav. And so from Lackland Air Force Base, where I went through basic training, I was put on a bus and sent to Biloxi, Mississippi at Keesler Air Force Base. And I was there for about 9 or 10 months going through electronics school before my first assignment, which happened to be Selfridge Air Force Base in Detroit, not far from where I lived. Of course, I always figured that when you're in the military, you get to see the world a little bit. I was stationed at home. I lasted there for about 1.5 years when the North Koreans shot down an EC-121 aircraft, and they took custody of the Navy ship, the Pueblo. So because of that, we were deployed. I was working on F-106s at Selfridge for Air Defense Command, ADC. And we were then deployed to Osan, Korea to take over or help with the defense of South Korea. We were there for 6 months. When I came back, they moved the wing from Selfridge to Wurtsmith Air Force Base in Oscoda, Michigan. Again, Michigan. Then I was sent down to go to a classified system again at Keesler Air Force Base. And when I came out, I was assigned to Ubon, Thailand, on a F-4s. We had 2 wings of F-4s that were called PAVE Phantom, P-A-V-E, PAVE Phantoms. And they had a LORAN system. At the time, it was highly classified. Today, most people know it as GPS. But 50 years ago, nobody seen this kind of accuracy and pinpoint navigation and targeting. I spent 1 year there. I came back, and they assigned me to K.I. Sawyer, Michigan, in Marquette in the Upper Peninsula. Again, I couldn't get out of Michigan. I took a quick 8 or 9 months there, and I managed to get down to Thailand again, and they sent me to Utapao because they had modified 5 B-52s. They were using the system to target waves of B-52s on targeting, because they had been using the F-4s, but the F-4s had a problem at high altitude, smaller wing area on the aircraft. So they modified 5 B-52s. Since I knew a little bit about the system and was trained by some of the design engineers when I was at Ubon, they got me on flight status, and I ended up flying combat missions as an in-flight maintenance, electronic maintenance guy. And I sat in the IP seat, which is between the pilot and the co-pilot in the cockpit. That was my assigned seat for takeoff and landings and on bomb runs. We would drop our load on the first target. 3 aircraft behind us would then drop their load on the same target. Those 3 aircraft would leave. We would wait for another 3 aircraft. They're called cells. 3 B-52s a cell We would then take them across the next target, and they would release their load off of our equipment. So everybody would go up, they'd hit their target and go home. We went up, we'd hit our first target, and then we were up for another 8 to 10, maybe 12 targets a night. So we were a lot more vulnerable about getting knocked down than going up and hitting one target, because we were doing 10 or 15 of them. In-flight refueling was part of an every night occurrence, so that was it. And I managed, because of being critical on the system, I ended up staying there from 1970 through all the way through 1975. So I was there for 4 years, where most people would go for a 1-year PCS assignment and get rotated back to the world. And I was there for 4 years at Utapao.
Okay. So what was, when you were in Thailand and then going to, how did you say that?
Utapao.
Utapao?
Yeah, Utapao.
What was your day-to-day activities? What did it look like for you?
Well, if you look visually at the base, the east side of the base was all B-52s. It was a huge amount of B-52s. I don't remember how many aircraft. I'd say easily 50 to 55 or maybe 60 of them. On the west side of the runway was all tankers, KC-135s, which they would go out at the same time we would go out. We'd launch what they call the compression. You'd launch 9 or 12 or 15 B-52s all at one time. Usually in the late afternoon. We flew all night. And then you'd recover them, basically coming back all at one time. And the tankers would go out at about the same time. They would refuel us, if we needed refueling. There was also B-52s that flew in from Guam. They had about a 14-hour day just getting to and from the target. We could be over target within 20 to 30 minutes or less because we were in Thailand and much closer to the combat activity. I mostly flew later near the end in Cambodia. And I was in on August 14th, 73, which is the night before the last of the bombing. The bombing officially ended August 15th, 73. So I flew up to the night before. And so far as on the base, I either worked out or repaired equipment on the aircraft during the day, but mostly because I flew, I was assigned in the aircraft, and if anything went wrong on the system during the flight, it was my responsibility to get it back up online. It was critical for the mission strike, and it could be repairing or replacing switches and control panels and things like that, reseating cards and computers. So yeah, I'd have to literally take the equipment out of the mounts and stuff in flight. Other than that, it looked like any other Air Force base. Lots of activities. You got people loading bombs. You got people servicing fuel. You got people servicing hydraulics, electronics, all day long. It's a round-the-clock operation. Usually most shops operate on a 12-hour, 7-day-a-week basis. And if we were doing a lot of targeting, sometimes our 12-hour days became 15, 16-hour days with a 2 or 3 hour lap, lap over with the day shift coming on and the night shift still working, and night shift finally leaving and day shift finally taking over, so there's a lot of activity.
Sure. Did you have any downtime? Were you able to travel for pleasure?
I didn't travel too much. I met and married a gal from Thailand there, and so if I wasn't flying, I was home, which was a couple miles away from the base. I had my own vehicle over there, and so I could get back and forth now, depending on taxis or local buses or whatever. Or as the kids today would think, there was no Uber service, so, And, but I could get into Thailand, or into Bangkok, or Pattaya Beach, which was kind of, in those days, it was kind of like a rest and recovery area, like Miami Beach is here. The college kids go to spring break or whatever, and Pattaya Beach at that time was a nice place to go. They had some nice restaurants and bars, and it was a lot of Europeans would vacation at Pattaya. It's not so much the same anymore today, I understand. I've seen some video and it's not the same fun spot. Not fun, I should say it's not family friendly.
So after Thailand, where did you go next?
Well, I came back to the States and I was reassigned to a MAC base, Military Airlift Command, in Little Rock Air Force Base. And I was in charge of maintenance on 56 C-130s and basically a room that's called job control. That's where you dispatch people out, electricians, electronics, hydraulics, prop people, engine people, whatever the aircraft has a problem or a write-up on. The job control is responsible for coordinating who gets to the aircraft and in what order. You can't pull an engine if you haven't already got a prop removed. You can't remove a prop if you haven't got hydraulics removed. You can't do hydraulics until the electrician gets there. So you have to do the coordination in the right order to get the aircraft ready for maintenance, get it repaired and get it back online. At the time, I was approaching 12 years in the military, and my thought was to go the full ride. The whole 25 years and retire. They were also downsizing the military significantly due to the fact that we were no longer committed to Vietnam and we needed a lot less people. So they developed a system, WAPS testing, which helped determine promotion, the rate of your promotions and what grades you were promoted at. But it also helped determine who they wanted to keep in the service or who they were looking to get rid of. An underperforming person, they weren't interested in retaining any longer. So they came up with having to get a line number. In other words, this was your guarantee. You could re-enlist if you wanted to. So I decided at that point, because inflation was running at 4 or 5% and our military pay was increasing at 0.5% or 1% a year, I thought if I stay another 8 years, I don't know if I'll have enough money to buy a house when I get out, because the cost of living was vastly increasing way quicker than our pay rate was. So I decided to go to Detroit and look around and see what job possibilities there were. I wanted to make sure that I would later have said, gee, I wish I would have known about this opportunity, I would have taken it. So I went up and I interviewed at a lot of places, and at the time it was called Michigan Bell Telephone, now AT&T mostly around the country. They offered me some pretty good opportunities, but there would be a deal about, basically it would be my turn in the barrel for a while. I'd be the new guy on the block. I didn't think climbing poles in the middle of winter to work on telephone lines would be something I would be interested in. So I decided to pass on those, and on the way back to Little Rock Air Force Base, I was going to go through St. Louis. Now when I was at Ubon, Thailand, I worked on F4s on this lower-end system. I also got to meet some of the factory field reps that were there, the civilians. And I kept in contact with them over the years. And I called a friend up who I had known for many years. And I said, look, I'm coming through the area. I'm coming back from Detroit, going down to Little Rock. What's the chance of stopping and having dinner with you? You know? And he said, fine. And this was on a Thursday afternoon when I talked to him. And I said, by the way, as I was getting ready to hang up, I said, what do you got for an old XF4 troop? And he says, let me check. So he went into work Friday. I arrived Saturday to go out to dinner. And he had a McDonnell Douglas employee job application on his kitchen table, and a thing called and you probably have seen these on the History Channel, a typewriter. Oh. Click, you know. And we filled it out, and I told him, he said, can you stay tomorrow? And I said, well, I have to be back to the base Tuesday, so yeah, I could stay tomorrow. It was only another 5-hour trip by car from St. Louis down to Little Rock. And I said, yeah, I can stay. He said, well, I've got an interview set up for you. And I said, well, I don't have a suit, you know, with me. And I said, I don't know. And Chuck stood about 5'2.5", or I'm sorry, 6'2.5" to maybe 6'3". At that time I was 6 feet. I've shrunk a little with old age. You'll find that out. And he says, well, he says, I can loan you one of my suits. I said, it's not going to fit me. Well, he says, well, my wife can hem it up. Well, I put it on when she hemmed up, shortened the pant legs and stuff, and I told him, I said, really need a wicker basket for this interview. And he said, what? And I said, if I'm going to look like a refugee, I need a wicker basket. Anyhow, we went in, and it turned out the person that he had set up the interview with was the senior vice president for all electronics for McDonnell Douglas, who happened to have his office right outside where Chuck's desk was. And we interviewed. The only thing I didn't fill out on the form was a box saying what my desired salary request would be. And he said, we got to put something in there. And I said, well, I've been in the service, and the service is like paid in the bottom 2 or 3% of the public, you know, the normal income level. You don't get rich in the military. And I said, I don't want to put something so cheap that you go, oh, we can get him for nothing. And I said, but I don't want to put something down that you would look at it saying, there's just no way, you know. And he said, you got to put something in there. He said, if it's too much, he said, we'll negotiate back and forth, and we'll come to some sort of a deal. Well, I knew what Chuck made, so I put $10 a week less than Chuck made, because Chuck had been with the company for, I guess, about 15 years at that point. That was in July of '77. By October, I hadn't heard anything. And I called Chuck, and he said, well, let me check. He said, they should have made you an offer or something. And it turned out, because I wouldn't be starting my terminal leave and starting with the company till the second day of January '78, they were processing everybody that was going to be starting in September and August and October. And I said, well, but there's a problem. They're trying to reduce the forces. So if I tell them I'm getting out, I won't get a line number to re-enlist. That's permanent. I'm out. If I tell them I'm going to re-enlist, not take the job at Mac, then I get a line number, and it's expected I'm going to re-enlist for 4 more. So they had somebody call me the next day, and they said, we definitely, you know, we accept your, you know, your request for your salary. Then I wish I would have put down more money. And you know, we're going to accept you as an employee. And I said, but I need it in writing before I make a decision like this, because it involved me and my family. They overnighted it to me, and then I took a leave, you know, and walked in the next day and told them I was going to leave. To which my supervisor was shocked. You can't do this, you know. You're 60% of the way to retirement. I mean, you know, you get nothing if you get out before 20 years. And I said, but I looked at it and said, I just can't afford to stay. They made me this great job offer. And I ended up going to McDonnell Douglas, and I was there for about 12 years, working on mostly what they call black programs, classified programs. And I was working on what was supposed to be the next stealth fighter when the Berlin Wall came down. And the government started canceling contracts in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. And this was a Navy jet that we were developing. And I got cut loose at that point, so I just basically, quote, retired, unquote. So that was that on that.
Okay. Let's see. So after you ended your service, you stayed up in, that was Michigan, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And
well, no, when I got out of service, I was in St. Louis at McDonnell Douglas.
Okay.
You know, until the program was canceled, and then I moved back to Michigan because I already bought a lot of acreage for someday to retire on. I just didn't realize that someday was going to be 20 years sooner than I thought. So we moved up, and I built a home, designed to build a home on the property, and I've been there ever since.
Great. So during Vietnam, where were you?
At Ubon for the first year, which is in the northeast portion of Thailand. And then I was, for the 4 years, I was at Utapao, which is south of Bangkok, right on the Gulf of Thailand. I made a few trips in and out of stopping like in Saigon or whatever, flying back and forth to the States on a couple of trips that I made for the government. But mostly when I was airborne, it was over Cambodia and Laos. I had some South Vietnam and some North Vietnam targeting that I did, but I wasn't on the ground. I was at 23,000 or 38,000 depending on the severity of the threat level.
And were you aware of how the media was portraying?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we get the Stars and Stripes, and occasionally people would get newspaper clippings that families would send them and stuff. So yeah, we knew that we weren't popular.
How did that make you feel?
I love this country. I enlisted not because of the pre-induction draft notice, but I felt an obligation that I need to pay some dues for what this country's been handed me by my forebears. And I needed to put some time in to make sure that the country stays secure and safe for me and mine. And this was all part of it. Granted, in the overall scheme of things, you could look at it as it's saber rattling from the Soviets or the Chinese or us, and we're using these little skirmishes. But it's basically, it's the two big guys staring down each other with causing a little activity in some smaller countries. That's never changed. It's been that way all down through history. I don't think people had a in-depth knowledge of what was going on, and I think people sometimes make their minds up by not being confused with the facts. When I was at McDonnell Douglas, one of my good friends that I met there when I was an engineer was a guy who was a retired Navy chief. He had a desk, several desks over from me, and I remember one afternoon a couple of people that had just joined the company, they were right out of college, young engineers, and somehow they got into this discussion about Vietnam. And they knew that we should have done that, or they knew that we shouldn't have done this, and they'd had some very definite opinions. And I looked at Ed, and he looked at me, and we both had time at sea, Southeast Asia. Him literally at sea, you know, on the ship. And I don't know, you know, how if you look at somebody, you don't have to say anything, you just, everything's exchanged in the eyesight, the eye contact. And I ignored these two young guys, and my feeling has always been, and to this day it's always been, if you weren't there, I can't explain it to you. If you were there, we don't need to talk about it. You already know. When I came home, and I started at Mac, I put everything in boxes and sealed them. I shot some 30,000 slides, pictures. A lot of them of Thailand, Bangkok, temples, things like that. But I shot a lot of pictures airborne during combat missions and on the base and during maintenance and refuelings and the day-to-day base life. I sealed all those up, put them in boxes, and when I walked away, I didn't keep in touch with anybody in the service that I had been with, in some cases for years. I didn't join the VFW or the American Legion or anything like that. I just got on with my life. And I remember after I left McDonnell Douglas and we had built a home in Michigan, and I remember going into a grocery store one day, and between where I live and going into town, there is a American Legion. And I remember walking into the grocery store one day, and there were two guys out front with a card table and a couple of chairs, and they had some forms. And as I walked up, I was asked, "Were you in the service?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "From when to when?" And I told them from '66 to the beginning of '78. And they said, "Well, we're looking to recruit a Vietnam vet." And I asked them, I said, "Well, did I hear you say you're looking to recruit a Vietnam vet?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "I'm not your token guy." Because in addition to being, and I never experienced this, but I knew guys that were spit on. We were called baby killers. It was our fault. We lost the war. And nobody wanted us. We didn't have, and I understand we didn't have a VJ Day or a VE Day, that's victory over Japan or victory over Europe, where everybody came home at the same time at the end of World War II. Everybody more or less came home pretty quick at the end of Korea. We had guys that the war had been going on so long, you were just rotating in and out, week in, week out. There were guys were coming home, guys were getting discharged. There was never any one day to mark a change in the country. And consequently, even the veterans didn't want to have Vietnam members, for the most part. I don't say all of them, but for the most part. Now today I find it humorous that there's a huge active campaign to get Vietnam vets. And basically because the World War II vets and the Korean vets are all dying off, so they're losing the membership. They need members to keep the chapters open. All of a sudden, we're in vogue. But I never talked about it. I never kept up with anybody. I never joined anything. And a few years ago, I'm not real big on social media. I know a little bit about it. But somebody called me and they said, there's a picture of you on the internet in uniform. And they told me where it was, and I got on the computer and I looked. And my daughter had posted a photo of me in uniform. And I called her up and I said, where did you get this picture? Because I've never shown my kids any of this stuff. I never talked about anything about my involvement in the military. They've never seen my uniforms. They're in a closet. And she said, I'm the oldest of three, and the second born, my sister had died 8 years ago. At the time it was like 5 years before, and her husband had sent my daughter this picture. And that then started her asking all kinds of questions. Where were you at? What bases? What did you do? What years? And then she's one that pokes around on the net. She finds out they got these reunions. Dad, you gotta go. You know, and she pretty much forced me into going to one last year. And that was the first time that I've had anything to do with anybody. I'm glad she did. Right up to the day I left to go to Tucson, it was a week-long reunion for the guys that were at Utapau, where I flew the B-52s out of. Right up to the day I was leaving, and I drove out, because I don't fly anymore, but I was very strongly committed to calling her up and saying I'm not going to go, even at the last minute. And I said, because I won't remember anybody. And usually when I got to the aircraft, especially if I was flying, all the maintenance people were gone. They've already fixed the plane, they've fueled the plane, they've loaded the bombs. The only people there are the ground crew, the crew chiefs, to get the aircraft started and taxi you out. And so I wouldn't have related to a lot of people. And it was true, when I got there, there wasn't anybody I knew. But I had to admit that after 5 or 6 days there, it was like coming back from a real tight family reunion. And I'm glad that she made me go. I'm not a hat person. She got this hat for me with the jewelry on it, and she made me promise to wear it. And I get occasionally people that come up to me and say, you know, thanks for your service. I feel uncomfortable. I'm polite. I acknowledge and tell them thank you. I'm also very cognizant about asking somebody, especially if they're my age, did you serve or whatever, and telling them thanks for your service. Or do you have anybody in service? Yeah, my son is, my nephew, or whatever. I said, well, tell them thank you for their service. But because I never interacted this way for 40 years, I feel very uncomfortable. I don't think I did anything special. And, but she makes me wear the hat. So, maybe it's our time, I don't know.
Okay. Um, so how do you feel your military experiences have affected your life?
Hugely. I don't know anybody that's ever been in the military that's not had a change. It's a life-altering, life-changing. If you weren't a disciplined individual, you are when you come out. You learn to interact and work with people. It's not all about me. I can make jokes all day long. Enough of that's been done already about the millennials. You know, gotta bubble wrap them. Their feelings may get bruised. You know, you're in school. Everybody gets a sticker. I got a participation ribbon. I don't think parents are doing, this is my own personal opinion, I don't think parents are doing their children a favor by raising them this way. What happens when you don't get that promotion you were counting on? How do you handle it? I came in second? I came in fourth? I wasn't even considered? No. I win every time I go out. I get a sticker. You know, everybody's a winner. I think the psychology about not making somebody or making somebody feel better about themselves by rewarding them on every single level possible is more detrimental than saying life's not user friendly. Occasionally you're going to be disappointed. Occasionally devastated. You know, you didn't get the promotion. The company folded. It went bankrupt. You're all out of work. What do you do now? Oh my God. My dad died. My boyfriend's been in a car accident. Oh my God. You know, this is reality. And I don't think the kids today, I think even during my time, I was raised in this world. I expect a certain level of lifestyle. The country owes me. No, it doesn't. You got less than 1% of the population of the country today currently standing on the wall for you. I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but you got somebody standing on that wall. You got somebody down on a submarine for 45 or 60 days at a time, away from the family. A lot of guys in the military spend most of their time, a 20-year career, they spend most of that 20-year away from the family. They don't see the kids as graduations. They're not there at childbirths. Sometimes you walk away and you got a kid that's like 3.5 feet tall, and you come back and all of a sudden the kid's 4 feet tall. You lost a whole year and a half. Some of these guys are deployed multiple times before coming home. You missed out on a lot. But they're standing on the wall for you. So you can have a country where you don't have to listen to tanks coming down the street, or somebody over, like as an example, Israel or some parts of the Middle East where gunfire is normal. The kids are outside playing. They don't bat an eye to it. It's an everyday occurrence. You get the privilege of not having that. And it's because a few people stand on the wall. I think those people that stand on the wall, certainly myself included, I felt I owed a debt to the country. I'm not saying I'm better than people that didn't serve or didn't have to serve. I'm not better because I was in South Vietnam and somebody else was in the military at the same time and they only seen Germany. They didn't actually have to have a combat experience. I'm not saying I'm better than them, but they could have been deployed there if they were in the service. But I also had a brother-in-law that we only had this conversation once. If he would have been called, he would have gone right over to the Detroit tunnel or over the bridge into Canada, and he would have been a draft evader. And I said, everybody's got a right to their opinion. You got to do what you got to do. And I kiddingly told him during that one time we talked about it, that's okay. I had almost 12 years in. I put in 4 for you. But I also think that when it came time that the war was over and everybody who had gone to Canada or else other places, be it a college deferment intentionally to stay out of the military, they had good times with their girlfriends, they had this, they had that, and all this other stuff. And then when the war was over and all of a sudden the perceived threat on whatever level they were perceiving the threat was over, now I want to come home. Well, there's laws. Come on back, deal with the laws. You were a draft evader. Take your chance in court. You were old enough to make a decision. I have the right to say anything I want. Freedom of speech. A lot of guys have paid that red on the flag. There's been a lot of people that blood that color, so you have your rights. But you can't stand up in the middle of a theater screaming fire and have people stampeded and crushed or run over or killed, and people trying to get out of a crowded theater, and not have consequences for your rights to be able to scream fire or gun or whatever panics a crowd. There are consequences. I've never missed a vote in my life, even when I was in the service. I voted absentee. Unfortunately, the last few years I've voted against somebody, not for somebody. I don't like our choices sometimes, but it's all part of the process. Whoever is the president is still my president. Be it Democrat, be it Republican, be it male, be it female, I don't care. But you have to abide by law. And if somebody is going to be a draft invader at the time when I was in, and then when everything's over and they want to come home, I felt that you have to be qualified to vote. I don't know if you vote or not. It's none of my business. But you have to prove your citizenship. You have to prove where you live, because that's where you're going to be assigned a polling precinct. And you have to qualify to be able to vote. And I felt, well, when the war was over and everybody wanted to come home that had evaded the draft, that there should have been a qualifying way of doing that. And I felt at the time that the people that were qualified to allow somebody to come back and not pay some legal penalty should have been either people that were in the military that were allowed to vote on this, or somebody whose parents lost their kids during the war. They should have said yes or no to draft evaders coming home. That should have been a qualifying thing, not a presidential pardon or a waiver, which is what happened. So if you want to choose to do something, you need to make amends. Let the American public who lost their kids during the war or served, let them say yes or no to whether you come home without penalty of prosecution. They didn't do it. That made me a little sad. I once made a joke when I came home at a gathering, and I said about as loud as I'm talking right now, this is the worst country in the world to live in, and the room around me went pretty quiet. And I said, except for all the others. I would never give up my American citizenship. Never. I don't agree with everything we do. We should be doing it so much smarter than we're doing it on multiple levels. But people are still willing to die to get here. That says something about the American experience. That's what being part of the military is about. Defending the right to give you people what you want. Or I shouldn't say you people, our people. Like I said, they're willing to die in overloaded boats. They're willing to try to get across borders and being shot at, or, you know, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I don't know what some of the answers should be, or possibilities of what some legislation could be crafted to be. But we should be doing things a lot smarter. And my belief is everybody should serve. Everybody. Israel, male or female, you all serve. Say it's your down payment for thank you for having a great country and a great life to live in. I paid my 2-year, 3-year, 4-year dues. I'm a paid member. I'm a card-carrying, happy, satisfied, proud ex-military or retired military, and I kept the country the way it is. And hopefully people will do things a little smarter. But it is a life-changing experience. Some of the benefits you get is you get a good education. I mean, I wanted a traffic controller. It's a high-stress job. But I came out and it got me a job at McDonnell Douglas. Now, not only because of my military electronic experience, but because of the contacts I had. I never went through the front door at the employment office. I was hired in basically through the back door because of people that knew me and stuff. You can't get that kind of stuff anywhere else. And a lot of people have had a wonderful experience in the military. Some of them not happy, but they served their time. GI Bill to get you help through college. GI Bill because you've been away from society. You gave up a certain number of years of your life. And now this is a way of getting back through education and stuff to be able to get a better job, to have a better life. It's a good foundation. So I don't see where my military experience was negative at all for me.
That's good. Is there anything that you feel like we haven't discussed that you'd like to bring up?
Now you'd have to drag out an individual subject. I'm still closed mouthed about a lot of stuff. I mean, I've answered your questions and maybe a little too long in some areas, but yeah, I can't promote this or that or whatever. I mean, if you want to target a specific thing, I'm more than happy to talk about it, but I can't think of anything. I was just another guy, millions of guys that just went and did a job, served my time, a little more than that, you know, but no better, no worse than anybody else. I wouldn't give up. I'd do the 12 years again in a heartbeat. When 9/11 hit, I watched on live television the planes going into the buildings, and I went down to the local recruiter where I live, and I wanted to volunteer to go back in, and they wouldn't take me. I was too old. And I said, but I've got, you know, a skill set. You don't have to wait a year training me or whatever. Or maybe, you know, updates on some electronics. I said, but you can put me to work tomorrow. I don't have to, you know, spend a year in basic training and tech school or whatever. I said, I'm ready to go now. I'm already psyched, you know. I've already got military bearing, so to speak. Now you're too old. So, but yeah, I didn't hesitate at all in that thought. I didn't call and ask my wife, what do you think? I just, I went right down. And we would have hacked that out later if she wasn't happy, but I was ready to go back in. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that thought that on that day either. But I'd never give up my citizenship, never lose the love for this country. And it's basically because we've developed a little system here and we've protected it, usually done from afar. Most people don't get it because the last time we really had anything on our front door was the Civil War, short of Pearl Harbor or 9/11. But most people have no idea. They're not touched in their daily life by conflict. Or people all over the globe. They have a lot of it in their front door. And we're very lucky, very fortunate. Maybe two oceans help, I don't know. But people just don't know how lucky they are.
Okay. If you have nothing else to add, then that concludes our interview. And thank you for your service.
Thank you. Appreciate it.